Hello. Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, perhaps, to everyone throughout the world who may be, what shall I say, foolhardy enough to subject yourself to the hours of lecturing that may follow. So I hope you won't get too bored by it all. Now, what I'm going to talk about basically is, as Tungyi has introduced me, from this vantage point of a philosopher trained in the analytical school of philosophy, but who has taken an interest, first of all, in the philosophy of biology, then in the philosophy of genetics, in the philosophy in ecological studies, etc. And so with that background, I then turned my attention naturally to the philosophy of medicine. Now, for the purpose of, as you know, the subject is immensely complex and immensely large. So to narrow down somewhat, what I propose to do in this these 2 days exploration with you is really to concentrate on the philosophical framework in which the medicine is embedded. And having excavated the philosophical framework, some of the major concepts in which the medicine is embedded, then I will later on, probably tomorrow, in the second exploration, to talk about the methodological implications of such a body of philosophical ideas for the practice of understanding the Chinese medicine. So basically, that's the rough outline of what I'm going to do. Now, first of all, too, let me, as a philosopher, it's in my DNA to start everything off by defining my terms. So I better get it off my chest before I say anything else. And now, how do I use the term Chinese medicine in this 2 explorations I hope to do with you, to share with you? First of all, I am simply referring to that system of medicine, which is, in a sense, you can say, is by and large indigenous to China and to Chinese culture and civilization, as far as I know, that is. Obviously, I don't know everything about the subject because, as I say, the subject is very vast and very complicated and very large. And historically, it has lasted, I think, probably more than 2,000 years. So obviously there'll be large gaps in my own knowledge. So before I carry on even with giving you a working definition of how I look at Chinese philosophy, let me enter a caveat. Please don't take that what I'm saying is gospel truth or things written on a stone tablet. That's not my intention. My intention is simply to share with you some of my ideas and understanding of this vastly complicated subject. So, so take everything I say with a dollop of salt, with question marks. If you don't agree with me, fine, that's not a problem because we are all in the business of exploring the subject together. So if you find that what I say is has to be qualified, or indeed, even I'm totally up the spout, do let me know, and then we can have a fruitful discussion, let's hope, based on that disagreement. So please feel free when it comes to the latter part of today to raise whatever queries you might have, whatever puzzles you might have, or whether reservations you have with regard to the approach that I'm taking. So now back to the subject of defining my term. As I said, I'm using the term Chinese medicine for the purpose of this presentation, simply to refer to that system of medicine, which has evolved probably more than 2,000 years in Chinese history. I will show some of the details why I think so as I go along. But for the moment, then, I will just leave it as that, a very vague working definition of the subject. Now, the next big point I want to draw your attention to is that in my understanding of philosophy and its implications for other disciplines and domains of intellectual activity, it is this. I am what may be called a practical philosopher. I don't know whether other people have ever called themselves a practical philosopher. I know that some people have called themselves an applied philosopher, but I'm not an applied philosopher. I am, I think, a practical philosopher, in the sense I take an activity such as medicine, or such as ecology, or whatever it is that one is looking, or law, and then as a philosopher, having been trained in the analytical school of philosophy, I then use certain methods of understanding the subject. So I use a set of methodological tools, if you like, upon the first order activity with which I am commenting on. So in that sense, then I call myself a practical philosopher and not an applied philosopher. So, so I hope that more or less would do for the moment. But of course, what the conception of philosophy I am practicing, it will occur to you as we talk and as I raise matters to fill in the details for you. Now, how would I like to present, according to my understanding of Chinese philosophy, to you today? I say today because you'll notice too that I constantly may change my mind. Sometimes I may even change my mind from 1 minute to the next, because as thoughts occur to me, I might suddenly see an angle and would like to qualify what I've said 5 minutes ago. So you have to bear with me should such moments of enlightenment come. It can be confusing, but I'll try not to be confusing. Right? Okay. Now then, how do I understand Chinese philosophy for the purpose of this discussion? Now, I would like to introduce it by, as I say, relating it to a general philosophical framework, so that philosophical framework will then lead me into talking about certain major texts in Chinese philosophy in order to show in what way Chinese medicine is embedded in such a larger philosophical context. So now then, the characterization in a nutshell that I would give, if you press me at this moment in time, is to say that I would characterize Chinese medicine as Yi, Dao, Yi. Now, the first Yi is the Yi of the Yi Jing. Dao is the Dao of Lao Tzu. And Yi, the third syllable, as it were, the third character of Yi Dao Yi, is medicine. So in other words, Yi Dao Yi, which the Chinese call it by, themselves call it by, is therefore embedded in the central philosophical concepts of the Yi Jing, of the Dao De Jing or Lao Tzu, and the ancient Chinese have, I suppose, if you like, combined these ideas into a systematic whole, if you like, so that in the end you have a system of medicine which we today call Chinese medicine, and which they themselves call Yi Dao Yi. Now, in order to make my points in the end very clear, go back to the main point that I have just raised, that for any systematic discipline, such as medicine, such as law, or whatever you care to think of, you've got to understand the philosophy, right? So I'll just give you some examples why it is necessary in science and medicine, whether you're talking about this, the Chinese tradition, or whether you're talking of the Western tradition, to go back to the philosophical framework in which these accounts are given. So very, very quickly, I'll give you some examples. If you take Western science, it depends on how you date it. Some people date Western science to the ancient Greeks, of course. So Western for instance, you have the philosophy of biology as Aristotle would practice it, etc., etc. Now, if you take physics, some people would say that, for instance, modern physics began with, say, Galileo and Newton. Now, to understand then what modern physics is, you've got to go back to the modern Western philosophy. So to cut a long story short, let me just give you very quickly some examples. Take Aristotelian science, which is medieval Western science, because to remind audience very quickly, first of all, in the Western tradition, you have the ancient Greek philosophers. Then, unfortunately, the ancient Greek philosophers collapsed when Hellenism disappeared, as it were, followed by Hellenistic philosophy, and following the conquest of Alexander the Great. This is in a nutshell. And then Europe came under the influence of the Roman Empire. And when the Roman Empire finally departed from the shores of Western Europe, then it fell into the medieval so-called Dark Ages. I think one would have to use it just as a turn of phrase. They are not really as dark as some people might like to think them to be. But for the purpose of this discussion, let us use the standard phrase, you know, the medieval Dark Ages. And then suddenly came the Enlightenment, the Renaissance first, followed by the Enlightenment in modern Western thought. And so, and from then on, modern Western philosophy and modern Western science came into existence, which then brings us up to the modern day, the contemporary world in which we live. Now then, if you want to understand Aristotle's science, particularly his science of biology, you've got to understand Aristotle's four main causes. The four main causes are being material, formal, efficient, and final. Now, take a statue. Say we have a statue, or I don't know, of Alexander the Great, perhaps, riding on his horse Bucephalus. Now, the material cause is quite clear. It's probably made of bronze or stone or whatever fancy material people might like to make a statue of. The efficient cause are the sculptors themselves, or a sculptor who done it. Then the final, the formal cause is he must carry in his head a blueprint, if not actually on a bit of paper in front of him, he carries in his head of what Alexander he thinks might look like, what his horse might look like, what someone riding on a horse might look like, the posture of the horse, and so on. So that is the formal cause. And then the final cause is the reason why he's sculpturing it, why he's doing the sculpture. And it could be because his society of which he's a part has commissioned him to do it, because his community likes the idea of Alexander the Great being a cultural hero, and to celebrate a cultural hero, you've got to put up a statue in your town square or plaza or something. So you have four main causes, right? Now, after the Enlightenment, come modern Western science and modern Western philosophy to back up the modern science, Aristotle's 4 causes were pared down to 2. We got rid of 2 of them. The 2 of them which were not acceptable, they were considered to be metaphysical in the abusive sense of the word metaphysics, because there intervened a philosophy called positivism. And positivism does not like metaphysics in the abusive sense, because they equate it with unintelligibility, with absurdity, with nonsense. So what are the 2 causes that they found metaphysical and therefore offensive and acts from Aristotle's schema of explanation? And that is the final cause and the formal cause. They say no good. We don't want to investigate into people's thoughts, you know, that's subjective stuff, not objective. Modern science, you must remember, is very objective and quantitative. So no good. So formal cause is axed. Final cause also, we don't care, you know. Natural phenomena has no final cause anyway. So what we are left with is the material cause and the efficient cause. So that is how we understand modern science, how we understand natural phenomena today, following this kind of philosophical framework. Now, so that is, so to give you just one example. Now, in Aristotelian science, particularly during the medieval period of European science and philosophy and history, how do you explain the law of acceleration, of acceleration? That if you would throw a stone from the top of the Tower of Pisa, let us say, you'll find that the object falls faster and faster as it reaches the ground. Now, an Aristotelian physicist then explains it this way. You see, every object has its own natural home. A stone.
I'm sorry, Kee Kok.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
The interpreters are having some difficulty keeping up with the pace.
Oh, I'm talking too fast.
So please, yes,
right.
take your time.
Yeah. Sorry, interpreters. I'm very sorry. I tend to talk fast. But do moderate and tell me if I go fast again, because my natural pace is somewhat faster than normal, right? Okay.
Thank you.
Now then, so a stone is a heavy object. So if you throw a stone from the Tower of Pisa, let us imagine, that heavy object falls to the ground, because the home is the ground. So Aristotelian physicists tend to interpret the speed of acceleration in the following manner. They say, imagine yourself. You've been a long way visiting as a tourist, going around the world, and you're now finally at the end of your trip, and you're coming home to see your family, your loved ones. So as you got out of the plane, your heart thumps, you walk a bit faster, and you thought, I'll be seeing my loved one. Mind you, some people are not so loved in our lives, even though they're members of our family. That leaving apart, assuming they were all we considered all members of our family very beloved, we get more and more excited as we get nearer and nearer. So finally, when we get out of the taxi in front of our home and the door opens, that is when we get really the most excited. And so that is why you walk faster and faster, you run faster and faster as you reach home. So it's the same with the stone. The ground is its home, so it's joyful. And as it is, because it is joyous and joyful thing to do, it goes faster and faster. So that is how Aristotelian medieval physics explain it. Now, to a modern physicist, that is a piece of nonsense, because a natural phenomena has no feelings. It has no thoughts, nothing like that. It's all objective, quantitative science that we are doing. So therefore, we don't need the formal cause. We don't need the final cause. All that we need is the material cause. So the material cause in this case is the stone, right? And it has certain characteristics. As I say, it's heavy. It has a certain mass. It has a certain density, etc., etc. If the stone is not of that character, then but is more like a feather, then it wouldn't fall faster and faster as it reaches the ground, right? And the efficient cause has nothing to do with mental characteristics which the investigator have. It is to do with what we will say, the atmospheric pressure, the signs of friction, all these things, signs of aerodynamics. All these factors will then, influence or impact upon the way that the stone falls to the ground, or a feather floats in the air, or whatever it is we are trying to explain. So that is it. Now then, so this is modern science and modern embedded in modern philosophy. Now, if you look at Chinese medicine, which is the science, at least I claim it is the science, if you look at it has nothing to do, with our understanding of modern physics or modern biomedicine. So how would we understand what the Chinese themselves call Yi Dao Yi? So to understand Yi Dao Yi, I have very quickly then to tell you what the basic philosophical texts are in which the medicine derives itself from. So the Yi of the Yi Jing, let us start with that. Now, for the English speakers, maybe I should also call it the I Ching. I've been told don't talk about the Yi Jing because to many Western ears, they might not recognize it if you talk of the Yi Jing, but everybody knows it as the I Ching. So really, I should talk of the I Ching. But whatever it is, sometimes I might call it the I Ching, sometimes we call it the I Ching. I prefer to call it the I Ching, provided the audience, everyone knows I'm actually talking about the I Ching, right? Okay. Now, I prefer to talk of the I Ching for the simple reason that in the history of the I Ching as a text in Chinese understanding, there are various versions of it. Because from the Han Dynasty, the Han people, the Han scholars, added a part to it called the 10 Wings or whatever it's called. And then it came to be called the Zhou Yi, right? So I'm not talking about the Zhou Yi because the Zhou Yi has a modern part to it. For my purpose, the Han Dynasty is already too recent. You've got to go back to the really old parts of the Yi Jing. So I mean, the oldest part of the Yi Jing is the Yi Jing. It's not Zhou Yi. That's why I call it the Yi Jing. Now, if you ask me how I date the Yi Jing, again, I don't want to go into a long history about the history of the historiography, because we are not here to talk about historiography, but I'll simply say that Chinese scholars themselves probably would put it somewhere during the Warring States period, which will mean that it is, at least as a mature text, something like over 2,000 years ago. So let's be as vague as that. So no need to be more precise. Now, I'll come back to this point in a minute, but let's move on a little. So what is peculiar about the Yi Jing then? Now, to those of us who already know something about the Yi Jing is commonly understood as a divination text. Now, it's very strange to think that a divination text could possibly have anything to do with a thing called Chinese medicine, which I claim to be a science. So a mystery about that. So let me quickly explain away some of the puzzling features of this claim. Now, although it began as a divination text, no doubt it began its life as a divination text. I think Chinese scholars are on the whole convinced that very soon it was not simply a mere divination text in the normal understanding of the term, because officials and scholars worked upon the text to turn it into a set of diagnostic and predictive tools, if you like, and prognostic tools, diagnostic and prognostic, a set of tools, analytical tools, which can then be used to explain various domains of phenomena. Of course, one domain of phenomena the Chinese people were very interested in was in the art of ruling. So you can say then it is used in political discourse. Another area is in medicine, because we need to know how to diagnose and prognosticate, the trajectory of an illness, etc., etc. So it is in this context then that I say that it is a set of diagnostic tools, analytical and diagnostic tools to understand phenomena, medical phenomena, as well as enable us to prognosticate. Now, why is the I Ching so helpful? To understand that, you'll have to say, in that sense too, I'll have to bring in at this moment in time a point made implicitly by the Tao Te Ching, by the Lao Tzu, because Lao Tzu, the text called Lao Tzu, didn't actually use the term yin-yang as far as I know. But you would never understand the text itself without having the concept of yin-yang. So when all is said and done, the I Ching and the Tao Te Ching are really talking about the basic metaphysics of Chinese culture and Chinese civilization, and that is yin-yang. And because we are talking about yin-yang now, and I would be emphasizing this, you're really talking about, holism. In what sense, then, is it committed to holism and therefore never to reductionism as a methodological postulate? So now, let's just go back to the I Ching. The I Ching, as we all know, has got the Ba Gua. The Ba Gua is normally translated as the 8 trigrams, right? And if you have 8 trigrams, if you were to do a quick permutation of the 8 trigrams, I think mathematically, I'm no good at maths, but I trust other people's calculation, the permutation will turn out to be 64 hexagrams. So you have 8 trigrams and 64 hexagrams. Now, if you look at a trigram is what in Chinese, what in English, I would say, have 3 component parts. That's why it's called tri, it's 3 parts. And in Chinese terminology, they are called the 3 yao. So 1 yao, 2 yao, 3 yao. Now, a yao is consists of 2 possible types of constructions. One is what may be called an unbroken line. The unbroken line stands for yang, and the broken line stands for yin. So that is why yin, yang. So now I think at this stage, I may have to go into a diagram. Now, I'm no good at these things, so bear with me. I'm clumsy and forgetful and make silly mistakes. So do help me out, one and all. So my notes tells me that I have to share screen to get into it. So I'll have to suspend this. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, I'll write. I might be lucky. Now, can you see me? Can you see it all? Now, if you concentrate on this.
Yes.
Yeah, if you concentrate on this, let me put it further up. If you concentrate on this is 1 yao, 2 yao, 3 yao. Usually we start from the bottom, but it doesn't matter for my purpose where we start from. So this unbroken is a yang yao. This is, and the broken one is a yin yao. So yin, yang, so it forms, later on we shall see it forms a whole, right? Now, so that is simplistically what it is. So when the Chinese talk of yin yang, they're actually, I think, talking about yin qi and yang qi. Now, how do we understand yin qi and yang qi? And this takes us into the cosmology and therefore the philosophy of Chinese medicine, of Chinese, behind Chinese medicine. Now, to understand this, let me go further down. Now, this is a famous iconic figure, right? I don't need to say any more about this. But if you look at this picture, you will find that, let me go to this one first. You will find that this one is really my attempt to show people about the yin qi and the yang qi. So start with winter. Now, winter is the time where the yang qi stays in the water, according to the Chinese cosmology. It goes into the ocean. Now, there's some empirical evidence for this. I believe, according to oceanographers, actually, water retains heat much more than the surface area of Earth. So, so in that sense, it's quite correct to say that the yang qi stays in water, whereas on the surface it evaporates, it vanishes once winter has come. Now, if you look at this, this gua, you see, it stands for winter. This trigram stands for winter. And so you can see, just as winter ends, the yang qi starts to rise. So I say ascending, spring establishes. So this is spring. And then the yang qi floats up to this gua, which stands for summer. So you can see that this gua, which stands for summer, has 2 yang, yao. This gua, which stands for winter, has 2 yin, yao. So it expresses the difference between the two. And then in the autumn, the yang qi starts to descend. In other words, you lose the yang qi and the yin qi starts to rise. And then the yang qi sinks and finally sinks back into winter. So it is, in other words, then, I would like to draw your attention to some ears. It might sound, it might feel very strange that I will refer to laws of nature in Chinese science and Chinese cosmology. For the simple reason, because normally when people talk about laws of nature, they have Newton's laws of nature in mind, which are quantitative laws, objective quantitative laws. But yet I don't see why I should use the same concept about the laws of nature. But this time, in writing, I would put them in an italicized mode. So, but when speaking, I will just qualify it by saying, bear in mind that I'm talking about Chinese laws of nature, which are not quantitative at all, although I think they are objective, but they're not quantitative. Whereas the Western laws of nature are quantitative. Right, so I'll keep on using the Chinese laws of nature. Now, the Chinese laws of nature, basically, some people say are two, but I think that actually they can be reduced even to one. So whether you're talking about one or two, it doesn't matter because the concept is the same. Now, take one of the Chinese laws of nature, which are commonly called the 昼夜节律, which translated roughly would be the daily, the day's sequence of the daily sequence of night following following day, and day giving way to night again, you know. And if you're talking about this 40节律, then you are talking about the 4 seasons in the annual cycle. Spring is followed by summer, summer is followed by autumn, autumn is followed by winter, and then the cycle continues anew with spring, blah, 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 blah. Now, that is why, in the end, there is also another law, which the Chinese seem to have, a law of nature, which is called 周而复始, which I would translate as cyclic reversion. And this is precisely what I have just said. So when winter arrives, you can expect next year spring will occur, and spring will be followed by summer, summer will be followed by autumn, autumn will be followed by winter. So it's cyclic reversion. The cycle starts all over again, and that is why it is sustainable. It is sustainable because it's cyclic reversion, right? It's the same with daylight as opposed to nighttime. The daily sequence starts up all over again. So that is why I think, mind you, before I go on, let me just quickly add the thought which has just occurred to me. Now, in this cyclic reversion, one is not saying that the next winter which comes is going to be identical to the last winter which has just passed. It's not to say that, because there are differences in winter, differences in summer every year, especially if you live in this island called the UK, which I do. You can begin to say some winters, you know, can be dreadfully cold with frozen ground, thick ice, and so on. And another winter, it's very mild. So it doesn't mean that that they are identical. There are tremendous differences, one winter from another winter, but nevertheless, there's continuity as well as change. And so that is why at this point, you've got to go back to the Yi Jing, because what is the meaning of Yi in the Yi Jing? The term Yi in the Yi Jing means change. Originally, in fact, the Yi Jing is based on observation of the weather. the weather changes. So the ancient Chinese thinkers build a metaphysics, a cosmology from their observation of what they see about natural phenomena. So, so the ancient Chinese observe 1 minute, the sun is out, the weather is fine. Another minute, the sun goes behind clouds. It's no longer fine, but dark and gloomy. So when the sun shines and the sky is full of light, you call it yang. This is because of the sunlight. Yeah? The light comes from the sun, so it's yang. 太阳, the yang, which means sun. And then yin is the shadow. So when the sun hides behind a cloud, or the clouds gets in front of the sun, then it's yin. It's not fine. And that's why I might have repeated this joke to you two, Tungyi and Ephraim before. I said I'm constantly amused why it is that the ancient Britons never tumbled to the Yi Jing, the concept of change. Because in Britain, the weather is even more changeable than it is in a continental climate like China. But yet, for some odd reason, the ancient Chinese tumbled to it and the ancient Britons didn't. So that's my joke, right? So if you have, so the Yi of the Yi Jing means change. But bear this in mind, Chinese thought is what I call dyadic. In other words, it's the polar contrast between yin and yang do not conflict and oppose each other. That is Western dualistic thought. The Chinese do not have that. The Chinese have dyadism. So with dyadism, the polar contrast of yin and yang, of change, with that the notion of change, therefore, also implies the notion of constancy. So in spite of change, there is also constancy. So it's this very complex relationship between polar contrasts that the Chinese philosophers and therefore Chinese medicine, I think, are after. That behind yang is therefore yin, behind yin is yang, and the two do not clash and conflict. Following Aristotle's, why is it in the West that polar contrasts are treated as diagonally opposing, diametrically opposing and conflicting? I think we have to go back to Aristotle. My famous example is Aristotle's principle of excluded middle. Aristotle's principle of exclusion, when I put simplistically, simply runs like this: P or not P, either P is true or not P is true. So when you have this, you have conflict. Because let's take a religious example. If I believe in an Abrahamic God, but your God is not Abrahamic, right? So either I'm right or you are right, but both of us cannot be right because the principle of excluded middle permits only one of the two sides to be correct. So naturally, especially if I am an important economic military power, I would say my version of Abrahamic of religion is correct. You lot out there, no good. You are wrong, and therefore I impose my view on you in the name of truth and validity. And so that's how you can get, oppositional, very, very conflicting and diametrically opposed stances that people take. But Chinese philosophy, because it doesn't believe in dualistic conflicts of that and the principle of exclusive middle, as shown by these trigrams, if you go back to this, the trigram, the 8 trigrams, the Ba Gua, you can see that there are 8 positions, not 2. Now, this is the Qian Gua, this is the Kun Gua, this is the fully yang, this is the fully yin, right? But there are 2 extremes. But in between, you have a variety of permutations, which in fact incorporate the yin-yang components, polar contrasts, in somewhat different ways in each of the 2 things. So that is why it's a subject which I can't talk to you about in great detail today. That's why I think that ancient Chinese philosophy, logic, Chinese philosophy has no formal logic. That is quite correct. But having said that, it has an implicit logic. And the implicit logic is the 8-value logic if you take the dragon. Don't talk about the hexagram, right? With 64 values. I can't cope. 8, I could barely cope. So it is actually an anticipation of what today we call fuzzy logic. If you look at logic textbooks today, since the 20th century, the latter part of the 20th century, there's such a thing called fuzzy logic. And fuzzy logic is, in fact, also both sets of logic, a dualistic logic of Chen and Kun exists in computer logic technology, because Chen, the Yang Gua, is the 3 Yao is simply represented by 1, and the Kun Gua, the 3 Yang Yao, Yin Yao, are represented by 0. So computer technology is 1 and 0. So it's really, you know, these 2 extremes that you're using. But fuzzy logic also today uses the rest of these as maybe represented by the other members of the trigram, right? Now then, now, so you see how it is that therefore necessarily you have to understand yin-yang in terms of this by now very, very familiar iconic symbol of the yin-yang. Or I don't need to go into it in great detail, but just to point out why it is that they form a whole, because the whole of Chinese philosophy, cosmology, and therefore of all its activities, including medicine, is a holistic one. Now, another way of putting the point is to say that in Chinese philosophy and cosmology, which underpins Chinese medicine, is what in sinological discourse is commonly called correlative thinking. Tian Ren Xiang Yin, or Tian Ren He Yi. Tian Ren Xiang Yin, I think, is found more in medical texts, and Tian Ren He Yi is found more in other contexts. But I prefer, therefore, to use Tian Ren Xiang Yin, which sinologists translate as correlative thinking. But that is according to me. I don't buy that translation, because I think the translation makes it sound like a piece of epistemology, whereas I think it's a piece of metaphysics. It's a piece of ontology. And that is why I translate it as the macrocosm and the microcosm. There's a macrocosm out there in the universe, and there's a microcosm. But what happens in the macrocosm is in the microcosm, reflected or resides also in the microcosm. So that is why you see, if greater nature out there, the macrocosm, has yin and yang, so in us, the microcosm, we must also have yin yang because of qian ren xiang yin. So I call this, this is a mouthful, macro, micro, cosmic holism. Macro, micro, cosmic holism. Call it what you like, but to grasp what I'm saying, for the moment, for the sake of understanding what I say, you've got to work with my understanding that it's a piece of ontology. It is a piece of metaphysics and not correlative thinking. Correlative thinking, I think, don't capture the you know, the spirit and the essence of the subject. So that is what it is. So now then, with qian ren xiang yin, the concept of macro, micro, cosmic holism in mind, you can begin to look at this diagram, which actually I downloaded from PubMed. So whoever put it up has done a pretty good job, I think. It saved me creating it myself. It's my skill in creating these is not great, right? So you can see yin yang is at the top, and the yin yang is presiding over this via qian ren xiang yin, macro, micro, cosmic holism. Now then, as you can see, to understand this, I'm afraid we have now got to only mention, because I have no time to go into it in detail, a very important concept, and that is Wu Xing, which can be translated as 5 transformational phases. There are other ways of transliterating it, but I think that comes nearest to it. It's a phase. It's not about entities, although the Chinese like to use the word wood, fire, earth, water, metal, water, but it's not. It is actually, wood stands for the qi, for rising yang qi, because in spring, plants as organisms start to grow, and so you use wood to stand for the rising yang qi of spring. Fire, you just use to stand for the even greater increasing amount of yang qi of summer. And then you come to metal, where the yang qi begins to abate and the yin qi begins to increase at the expense of the yang qi in the autumn. And you use water, as I said before, to stand for the maximum amount, amount of yin qi come the winter. Now, these relationships that you see in the outer diagram here, this is sometimes called, they call it a nourishment, mutual nourishment cycle. Other people call it another thing, but it doesn't matter. You can say that one promotes the other, right? Now, the funny thing is, I can't explain in detail because we have no time. But the funny thing is, there are only 4 seasons as represented by metal, water, wood, and fire. But Wu Xing has got 5 phases in it. So where does the 5th phase come from? Now, the Chinese put in earth, because earth is a kind of equilibrating process, if you like. And so it holds, you know, the lot together, in my understanding. That is, other people may give you a different account of the function of, you know, of the role of earth played in Wu Xing. So now then, if you then go back, and these are the antagonistic relationships. So as can be shown by these arrows. So again, there's no time to talk about the details of wuxing. You probably need at least 5 hours to sort it out. So we have no time. So having drawn your attention very quickly to it, we now go back to how we understand Tianren Xiangying as that is microcosmic holism, when that is imposed upon the macrocosmic map is imposed on the microscopic map, that is. So this is an attempt to present the imposition of the one upon the other. So you can see that the liver has been assigned, it's the wood phase. And then fire is the heart phase, water is the kidney phase, and metal is the lung, the lung phase. And of course, the liver, heart, spleen, lung, and kidneys, they are the four, and these are, are they the zhang? Quick. I always get them mixed up. Ephraim, the zhang fu. I think I said something quite wrong there. Never mind. Anyway, in the Zhangfu system, right? So these are the Zhangfu. One is a Zhang and the other is a Fu. So forget what I've said in case I make a mistake. But anyway, so yes, Ephraim.
Liver, heart, kidney. These are the Zhang.
Zhang, all right. And the other is a Fu. Yes, Zhangfu. Thank you, Ephraim, for bailing me out. Right. Okay. So the Zhangfu system is sort of related to all this business. You see, the yin qi and the yang qi. Now, just to say a quick word, why is earth necessary? If you look at the spleen and the stomach form a Zhangfu, right? Now, if you think of it, the Chinese are very practical people, as the Westerners like to tell us. We are always thinking of eating. We're always thinking of food, primarily because if you do not eat, you do not survive. It's as basic as that, right? So in the end, if your stomach has no food in it, you are not going to last very long, right? The Chinese concentrate a lot on how to keep oneself alive, especially the old days when food was not so plentiful and readily available. So the spleen plays a great role in the digestion, the digestive function, storage, and so on, as well, of the stomach. And it is the spleen then. So if something is wrong with you and you are diagnosed with a deficiency of spleen T, then the Chinese physician will have to do something to top it up. Use 补药 to 补 the spleen, right? Okay. Ephraim, tell me if I'm talking rubbish, but anyway, so that is how I understand the thing. Now, so we must always bear in mind that what is in the macrocosm is always a microcosm in us. Now, just to give you one example of this. Now, as you can see, in the summer, the Li Gua has 2 Yang Yao in it. That means it has got a lot of heat in it. Whereas the Kan Gua, that standing for winter in the north, therefore, has got 2 yin yao in it with only one yang yao. So obviously the yin yao is on the ascendant and the yang yao is a bit subdued. So as a result, imagine yourself to be a physician, subject to Ephraim telling me I'm okay here. Imagine that you have been asked to see a patient and you take the mai, you che mai, and you discovered that the physician is asked to see the patient in the winter, right? Now, in the winter, because the macrocosm out there has a maximum of yang qi. In the winter, no, what am I talking about? Have a maximum amount of yin qi in it. So your mai should not have a predominance of yang qi in it, so to speak. But if I were the physician, imagine I myself, I'm no physician, but imagine I myself, I see a patient in the depth of winter, and I take his mai, and I see, oh God, he has got what is called a hou mai, which is a vigorous, robust mai, full of yang qi. Alarm bells will start ringing in my head. And I said, good grief, this man is storing up trouble if I don't do something to intervene. He's got too much yang qi in him for the season in the year, because this is winter. It shouldn't have so much. It should be more a reflection of the macrocosm out there in his microcosm. But unfortunately, it isn't. It seems to be the other way around. So the physician then prognosticates that unless he intervenes, gives a medication to lower the yang qi in the microcosm of the patient, in the summer, come the summer, when the yang qi is at its maximum with 2 yang yao up there in that gua, something dreadful is going to happen to him. He probably would have a heart attack or something, and he will be dead in no time. So, okay, this is a true story, which I think I got from Liu Lihong, 思考重义. And he said that, in fact, this was a real patient. The physician did diagnose a patient, but the patient was very stubborn. He didn't believe in Chinese medicine anyway. He was a top CCP cadre at the time, and he didn't believe in all this. His daughter did, but he didn't. And so the physician then wrote out a prescription with heat reducing, yang qi reducing medicinals in it. The daughter persuaded him to take it, the father to take it. Father refused. Daughter couldn't do anything, and it is reported promptly the next summer, the coming summer, father died of a bad heart attack or something to do with the heart, because he was overwhelmed by yang qi. He was already full too much of yang qi in him in the winter. Come the summer, where the macrocosm has yang qi as the maximum, this added up together would do him no good. So the chap unfortunately died. So that is my story to illustrate this. Now, since the Lao Qingqi is actually with the Lingnan Sustainable Project, and it is sustainability, one is talking about the ecosystem, aren't we? And so that is why I think I would like to end up, if I have no time, tell me folks, I haven't, but I would then end up by talking about Chinese medicine as ecosystem thinking or ecosystem science. Right? So very quickly, I would say, look at this system I put up here. There's the host, which may be called ecosystem 1. There's the agent ecosystem 2. and that is the environment ecosystem 3. Now imagine that the host, since we are living still in a pandemic of COVID-19, ecosystem 1, let us say, is that naughty virus, the difficult virus called SARS-CoV-2, sitting there. And the agent, let's ecosystem 2, is the poor victim who is harboring the thing, and which may either be asymptomatic or symptomatic. If you're unlucky, it might be symptomatic, but whatever it is, imagine the symptomatic case rather than the asymptomatic case, the agent carrying the SARS-CoV-2 virus. That person is living in the outer environment called ecosystem 3. Imagine that person, unfortunately, to be a frontline public, a worker in the public domain, either as a healthcare worker or as a security officer. I believe that they're very exposed, or as a nurse, someone working in a care home or whatever. You are in the front line because you see a lot of people who are victims of SARS-CoV-2, right? So your environment is not very good. So your macrocosm is not helpful. But if you have a concentric circle, then the one affects the other. So ultimately, whether you are going to get it or not depends on the interaction between all these ecosystems. So and so in other words, then, unlike modern Western biomedicine, where the causal relationship is what I call a monogenic causal relationship. That is the cause here, that's the effect here. One cause, one effect. This kind of medicine, which is Yi Dao Yi type of medicine, you're talking about ecosystem nesting. One ecosystem embedded within another ecosystem, which in turn is embedded in yet another ecosystem. So you're talking of a multifactorial causal framework. And a multifactorial causal framework, if you recall the yin-yang, the Wu-Xing diagram up here, that there are very complicated relationships between all these things. So one way, very quick way of understanding ecosystem thinking, and therefore also of Wu-Xing, is to say that ecosystem thinking, that Wu-Xing is really talking about an ecosystem and the relationships between the components of an ecosystem, because in ecosystem thinking, you have what are called both negative feedback loops and positive feedback loops. So you're talking about positive feedback loops and negative feedback loops. Now, negative feedback loops are easier to understand than positive feedback loops. The standard example of a negative feedback loop is to use the your air conditioning system, right? You set the temperature on your machine at X. Now, if the outside temperature is higher than X, then your machine will start releasing cold air until the set temperature is reached. So it always brings you back to the starting point, in other words. So that is a negative feedback system. In our body, the famous example would of course be how we control the heat inside our body. In the when it's very cold outside, our body, our physiology is primed or evolved in such a way, as an organism, we are evolved with an with a system, physiological system in such a way that when it gets very cold, our pores close up. When our pores close up, less heat is let out of our body, so we retain the heat and we maintain homeostasis. And when it's very hot, our pores open up to let out the yang qi, so to speak, and then we cool ourselves down by the sweat. So that is a negative feedback system. Positive feedback system is when several factors act together in a synergistic manner, so that let's put it this way. If you are talking of a simple-minded causal relationship, yes, if I have three things contributing, three variables contributing to the effect, simple-mindedly, I can work out what the effect of the first variable is, what the effect of the second variable is, and what the effect of the third variable is. Then I add them all up, and I say that is the causal outcome. That is the totality of effect. If I have three variables, each contributing to the outcome. Now, under multifactorial ecosystemic relationship, it's not like that at all. If I've got three factors, one contributing, the second also contributing, the third contributing, but they act synergistically. That is, they act together. They don't, they are not separate things. They act together. My three fingers are therefore together. And when these three together, then you'll find that in a synergistic outcome, that effect is greater than the first outcome where you are measuring this separately from that, and just adding up the three effects. So that is why it's very powerful. So with synergistic effects, you can flip very quickly from one system to another system. So that is why some people think that, why is it that suddenly we flip so quickly? We don't actually flip very simply. It looks as if the system flips simply because you're using the wrong causal model. But if you have the right causal model, you can explain how it flips, and you can predict even. So anyway, so that is ecosystem thinking. Now, I have two diagrams here, two figures here, in terms of ecosystem nesting using concentric circles. Now, let's this is the thing, right? Now, just concentric circles. I have said it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Unfortunately, I didn't do my diagram very well because I've got to skip that and look at this, how biomedicine may be interpreting that circle, that nesting of circles. So circle 1, which is the innermost circle, I would put it down that they put in DNA, RNA, i.e. molecular genetics. The next circle is 2, that is 2. They might put genes there. So these are genetic sequences. These are the whole genes. So in Mendelian genetics, you only have whole genes. In molecular genetics, then you can break it down further, but we are now living in this age, no longer in the Mendelian age. So that's why I put that as DNA, RNA, molecular genetics. So the next is genes, and genes are embedded in cells. So that's 3, third circle. The cells make up another embedded in tissue. The tissues then make up organs, such as the spleen, the heart, the stomach, but they are, as I say, understood as separate individual entities, each with its own functions. Now, on top of that, you have the skeleton, right? Because the tissues and the organs have got somehow to be protected or attached to something called a framework, the skeleton. So the body, the human body, the physical body, is then made out of 1 to 6, in my understanding. So the body's immediate external environment, which is 8, I put down as 8 here, that's 8. And I just simply put down, we need air to breathe, containing oxygen to survive. We need, wholesome water to drink, pure water to drink, purish at least, water to drink in order to survive. We also need food, nutritious food to survive. So that's the body's immediate external environment, what we introduce into our system. Now, and then embodied in that, that body is then in 9, which is understood in biomedical terms. This is 9 there, that the body is machine, not organism. So I said it performs an ontological volte-face, because up to the 16th, 17th century, even, let's say 16th century, body is always organism. But now there's a sudden change in Western philosophy. Body is no longer organism, body is machine. Now machine is an artifact. We humans create machines. I know that other animals create, may not call machines, but they certainly create artifacts. Ants create ants' nest, bees create beehives, so they are artifacts. But they are animal artifacts, not human artifacts. But we humans have a peculiar kind of consciousness, which enable us to design things called machines. As the Chinese say, 人是万物之灵. That means we human beings have got a very peculiar kind of consciousness. Our consciousness, unlike other animal consciousness, mammalian consciousness, they too are very clever. But we go one level beyond. And what is that level beyond? That level beyond is that we are capable of having abstract thoughts. Animals, as far as we know, do not have what we call abstract thoughts. We can actually commit our abstract thoughts to a bit of paper in terms of symbols when we do maths, an algorithm, that sort of thing. We can have writing, commit our thoughts to writing, etc., etc. So because we have this peculiar type of consciousness, that is why the Chinese cosmology called that man is 万物之灵. That it means that it has the most evolved, not advanced. Advanced is not the right term. The evolved kind of consciousness. Now, when the Chinese say 人是万物之灵, do not mistake what the ancient Chinese are saying to be an anthropocentrist. Anthropocentrism in the West is understood differently. Anthropocentrism in the West has a built-in hierarchy of superiority, of inferiority to it. So we humans, according to Western anthropocentrism, we are the superior to everybody else. And as a result, we look down on animals. The West looks down on animals. They are not as good as us. They are inferior beasts they are called, right? And so, whereas the Chinese has no built-in inferiority and superiority. It just simply means we are different. We share a lot of things in common with them. For instance, a lion, a cheetah is very smart indeed. We do share things in common with a cheetah, but nevertheless, we have a type of consciousness which is also different from that of the cheetah or the lion or whatever other animal you care to think of. So every animal has its own peculiar kind of consciousness, but we humans are pretty peculiar. And so in that sense, we are one Wuchilin because we can do abstract thinking. We can have language, which is a form of abstraction, different types of languages, mathematical languages, the languages we speak in terms of our mother tongues, that sort of languages, etc., etc. And we can do metaphysics, we can do philosophy, etc., etc. So now then, so because Western thought is based on the body is machine, not an organism, a machine is an artifact, and an artifact is a thing. So ever since Julien Offray de la Mettrie, when he wrote Man, L'Homme Machine, that book which he published, I think, in the 16th century, you know, it has shifted to thing ontology, no longer an organismic ontology, as Aristotle did, but a thing ontology as artifacts thing. So, so a thing occupies space, if you see what I mean, and that is why I say it focuses primarily on space, Newtonian science and Newtonian cosmology. Now, of course, I know after Newton came Einstein several centuries later, and Einstein actually added the temporal dimension, so it is space-time today. But actually, the space-time, even of Einsteinian relative physics, is very different from what I called time-space in Chinese cosmology, because if you go back to this jobby here, never mind, I'll just have to use, you see, you're talking of the sun up there in the summer. The sun up there in the summer at its height of yang qi, maximum yang qi, is actually casting its rays down on Earth. But the relationship for the Chinese is not so much the emphasis on space, of what is happening on Earth, but of the relationship of the seasons, of time, because summer, winter, autumn, spring, or whatever, is actually referring to time, the passage of time. So its emphasis is on time rather than on space. And of course, it has to shine on the Earth. The Earth is space. So that is why I put the difference as time, space, because time is it's a focus more on time than on space. Whereas in this system, the Western system, the emphasis is more on space rather than time, because you're talking about thing ontology. So, so anyway, so that is why I say that, you know, if focuses primarily on space. Now, if you look at this nesting of ecosystems under Chinese medicine, we don't talk about the 1, 2, and the 3 under the BM system here. The 1 for Chinese medicine is a tissue. That's the lowest level of reductionism, if you like. I don't think it's good to talk about reduction, but the lowest level of understanding is the tissue. Then after the tissue, you have an organ system. The Chinese do not understand every organ individually. It pairs it up as the zangfu. So if you're talking about the spleen, then you're talking the spleen stomach organ system, the Pi Wei system. And all these systems constitute the Wu Zhang Liu Fu. And so we are talking about entire material parts and total functioning of the person. And the person includes the emotions. So where am I now? 4. I put 1, 2, 3. Can't read, too small. I think that's 4. Now, 4, when you are talking about the human person, which possesses all these things, you are really talking about a human person with emotions. Whereas the body down here, that you're talking about has no emotions. You're not concerned with emotions. So that is why BM has great difficulty about the placebo effect and considered it is so anathema, whereas the Chinese, well, it's part of natural of phenomena. If we are humans, we have emotions. So emotions rest on beliefs. Depending on your belief, you believe that what you are swallowing is poison, it can have an effect on you. If you believe that what you're swallowing does you good, it also has an effect. One is called the placebo effect, the other is called the nocebo effect, if you want to put it in modern terms. But we are essentially beings with emotions. So emotions are not taboo subject. Emotions are part of the individual person. So when the Chinese talk of 身体, it is not the body of BM here. It's not this body you're talking about. It is why I put it as a person body. It is the whole person where the body is. But today I don't have time to go into any great detail. So let's look at qi. Now, this is the 天人相应. So the qi in 宇宙is the universe, the macrocosm, as well as the 经脉 via the 经络 network of the person body, which is the macrocosm. So when the Chinese physician ascertains your mind, he's actually ascertaining this, your yin-yang profile in your person body. That is what he's doing. And when he ascertains that, the yin-yang profile in your person body, then he knows how to diagnose what's wrong with you. And because he knows how to diagnose what is wrong in you, he can also prescribe you with the medicinals to help you get over the hump that you are confronting and which leads to your illness, right? So then 6 is your immediate external environment in which you live. True, like BM, it recognizes air, water, food, shelter, climate, all these are important. But it also specifically recognizes a social cultural environment in which the person body, the person is embedded in. So you can talk of tribes, groups, ethnic groups, polity, or whatever. Then 8, you have a larger physical and social environment in which the person lives, which includes the plants, the animals, the rivers, the air around you, etc. And the biggest of all, the cosmological environment in which the person lives. Then you have at least to talk about the heavenly bodies and their relationship to each other, at least within our own solar system. I know that there are plenty of solar systems today out in the world, in the universe, but our own solar, the ancient Chinese only know about our own solar system. They didn't know so many others. but minimally, you must at least know about your own solar system. So our solar system. So it is then captured by the Chinese laws of nature, such as the 昼夜节律, the 40节律, or 周而复始, which together, as I say, focus on time-space rather than space-time. And standing behind all this is then what I call process ontology, cum thing ontology. In BM, as you can say, the emphasis being on space, it focuses or highlights thing ontology. But because the Chinese way of looking is dyadic, and so process ontology can coexist with thing ontology. These polar contrasts can coexist as a whole, like yin yang itself. So our physiological understanding, when we talk about physiology, how a person functions, you're talking about process. When you're talking about whether a person is thin or fat, and you're talking about a thing, the figure that you see as the person enters the room. But you, in Chinese thought, the two are linked, because particularly in Chinese medicine, the two are linked. So you have process ontology and thing ontology. You cannot understand the thing without understanding the process behind the thing. And you cannot understand the process, of course, without the thing, right? So I think that more or less sums up what I really want to say. Thank you, Tungyi. Right. Over to you, Chu.